They found the body at dawn, nailed to the welcome sign just outside of Briar Fork Hollow. I'd been on the force for 11 years, and even after all the strange calls, the screams in the fog, the cattle mutilations, the folks who went missing only to return barefoot and mute, I'd never seen anything like this. Not in our town, not this close to the heart. The sign had always been a cheery thing. Welcome to Briar Fork Hollow. Elevation, 2,394 feet. Population, 312. Now the wood was stained with long streaks of rust brown, almost black in the early light. The body, strung up like a scarecrow, swayed gently in the mountain breeze. Its arms were stretched wide, the fingers split and pinned like the wings of some grotesque butterfly. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and clicked my radio. "Dispatch, this is done. You're going to want to send a forensics team to the hollow. We got a situation." Silence crackled through the receiver, then Lorraine's voice came, shaky and too quiet. "Sheriff, is it true what they're saying? That it's one of ours?" I looked closer. The man's face was bloated, his skin pale as candle wax, but I could still make out the features beneath the grimace of agony. Deputy Carson McBride. He'd gone missing 3 nights ago, last seen leaving the station after the midnight shift. "Yeah," I said, barely above a whisper. "It's McBride." Another long silence. I took a step closer, forcing myself to study the scene. There were patterns carved into the wood around the body, strange looping runes and symbols that twisted the longer I stared. Blood had seeped into the grooves, making them stand out like wounds. Below the body, in big crude letters, someone had scrawled, "You let them in." The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the mist that clung to the hills. The morning chill still pinched my skin, but sweat had begun to bead on my brow. Something felt wrong, not just crime scene wrong, but old wrong, like the forest itself was holding its breath. "Sheriff?" I turned. It was Deputy Holloway, his face pale as the frost on the ground. He'd arrived on scene just behind me, his cruiser's lights still flashing. "Help me cut him down," I said. Together we worked in grim silence, prying the rusted nails from McBride's hands and feet. When we lowered him to the ground, I saw that something had been stuffed into his mouth. I hesitated, then pulled it free. A scrap of cloth, black and threadbare, like an old miner's kerchief. Twisted into the fabric was a lump of coal, slick and glistening. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't coal at all. It was bone. Charred black, with deep, unnatural grooves cut into its surface. "What the hell is this?" Holloway muttered. Before I could answer, I heard it, a sound rising from the hollow woods beyond the signpost. It wasn't the cry of any animal I'd heard before. Low and mournful, almost like a song, but warped and broken. My skin prickled as the sound faded into the morning stillness. Holloway's eyes darted to the tree line. "You think it's them?" He didn't need to explain who he meant. Them, the old ones, the ones the elders only whispered about after too many whiskies by the fire. The things that lived beneath the hills, in places where the sunlight never touched. I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to believe this was just a twisted murder, some sick drifter passing through. But deep down, I knew better. We both did. "This wasn't just some psycho," I said. "This is a message." We bagged the strange bone and sent McBride's body to the coroner, but all day the unease lingered. Reports started flooding in from around the hollow, livestock missing, strange symbols burned into barn doors, power flickering in and out like the wires were alive and writhing. Then came the worst call of all. "Sheriff Dunn, you better get over to Mason's farm," Lorraine's voice crackled over the radio. "Something's wrong with the well." By the time I arrived, the sky had clouded over, casting the farm in a grim half-light. The Masons stood huddled by the old stone well, faces ashen. Mr. Mason pointed with a trembling hand. "Look for yourself, Sheriff." I approached slowly, peering over the edge of the well. My breath caught in my throat. The water was gone. Completely gone. In its place, a yawning hole descended into darkness, and from somewhere deep below I heard it again, that same mournful song rising up from the depths of the earth. "What in God's name?" Holloway whispered behind me. The well stones were slick with something black and tarry, and the same runes carved into the signpost were scratched along the inner walls. I traced one with my finger, feeling the cold sting of old magic baked into the rock. "This is bad," I said. "This is real bad." Outside, the storm seemed to gather strength. Wind shrieking down the chimney flue like a trapped animal. Then, the power died. The office plunged into darkness. For a moment, I just sat there, heart pounding in my chest. Then I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on, and scanned the room. Shadows twisted along the walls, and for one dreadful heartbeat, I thought I saw a figure standing by the door, tall, too thin, head cocked at an unnatural angle. But when I swung the beam toward it, the shape was gone. The radio crackled to life. Sheriff Dunn, you copy?" Holloway's voice was thin, strained. "I'm up at the Mason farm. You're going to want to get here right now." Static swallowed the last word. I grabbed my coat and bolted into the storm. The rain had turned the dirt roads to rivers of mud. Branches clawed at my windshield as I drove, and the headlights barely cut through the downpour. When I reached the Mason farm, my gut clenched. Holloway's cruiser sat skewed at the edge of the field, driver's door hanging open. His flashlight lay in the mud, beam flickering weakly. I called out his name, but the storm swallowed my voice. Drawing my sidearm, I approached the well. The same tarry substance from before now oozed over the stones like it was alive, writhing in the rain. Worse still, I could hear something. A chorus of voices chanting in a tongue that grated against my skull like iron on bone. "Holloway!" I shouted. A moan answered me. I found him kneeling at the edge of the well, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. His eyes were wide, staring into the abyss below, lips moving in silent prayer. "Deputy, talk to me," I said, gripping his shoulder. He flinched like I'd burned him, then turned to look at me. His pupils had dilated so much, his eyes were nearly black. "They're waking up, Sheriff," he rasped. "They're coming through the cracks." Before I could press him further, a tremor shook the earth beneath our feet. Stones tumbled from the well's rim, vanishing into the chasm below. From the depths came a noise I'll never forget. The grinding of stone, the snapping of bone, and something else, a wet, eager hunger. I hauled Holloway to his feet and dragged him to the cruiser. He babbled the whole time, words tumbling out in fragments. "Miners. They dug too deep. Found the hollow ones. Hungry, Sheriff, they're so hungry." I threw him in the passenger seat and floored it back to town, tires slipping in the mud. Holloway thrashed beside me, hands clawing at his face. "They showed me," he screamed. "In the well. They showed me what's coming." We barely made it to the clinic before he collapsed into convulsions. Doc Hadley sedated him, but his eyes never closed, just kept staring at something only he could see. As dawn broke, I stood on the clinic's porch, rain still pattering on the tin roof, and watched a thick mist creep down from the hills. It pooled in the streets, curling around lampposts and mailboxes like a living thing. The whole town felt wrong, hollow, like something had been carved out of it in the night. And then Lorraine's voice crackled over my radio. "Sheriff, you better get down to the church. It's Reverend Powell. He's missing." I arrived to find the church doors thrown wide, the sanctuary dark and cold. Candles still burned on the altar, their flames guttering in the draught, casting dancing shadows over the pews. On the pulpit, scrawled in the same looping runes as before, was a chilling message. "Our shepherd has gone to feed the flock." The floorboards beneath my boots creaked as I stepped closer, gun drawn, every hair on my body standing on end. And then I saw it. The trapdoor behind the altar, open wide, leading down into the old catacombs beneath the church. A place no one had dared enter for years. A place that smelled of damp earth and old bones. Heart hammering, I shined my flashlight into the darkness below. There, carved into the dirt walls, were fresh claw marks. Something had been digging its way up. The first step down into the catacombs felt like crossing a threshold I could never return from. The narrow wooden stairs groaned under my weight, ancient and damp with rot. The deeper I descended, the more the air changed. No longer just musty, but thick with a coppery tang, like old blood left to fester. My flashlight beam flickered, playing tricks against the rough earthen walls. I caught glimpses of things I tried not to dwell on. Deep scratches gouged into the stone, bones that didn't look entirely human. At the bottom of the steps, the tunnel opened into a cramped chamber. Candles ringed the room, their flames burning low and blue, casting ghostly shadows. In the center lay a crude altar fashioned from old minecart rails and black stones. Draped across it was Reverend Powell's clerical robe, empty, as though its owner had evaporated into mist. No body, no blood, just the robe, neatly folded, and something worse beneath it. A spine. Not Powell's, no. Too long, too knotted and warped. The vertebrae were fused in strange places, some segments ending in jagged hooks. I fought down a wave of nausea and stepped closer. Carved into the altar were the same looping symbols I'd seen before. But this time there was something new. A map of sorts, sketched in dark lines that looked suspiciously like they'd been drawn in blood. It wasn't a map of the church or the town. It was the old mine, Briar Fork Hollow. The lines showed shafts I didn't recognize, passages that twisted far deeper than the official surveys claimed. Beneath it all, a crude depiction of a sprawling cavern encircled by writhing shapes, and at the center, a black pit. Something about it pulled at my mind like a drowning current. I tore my eyes away, forcing myself to focus. Beneath the map, scrawled in frantic hand, were 3 words: "The More Opens." A chill danced down my spine. I raised my radio, but all I got was static. Figures. Down here, I might as well have been on the moon. That's when I heard it. A soft, wet sound, like something being dragged across the stone. Slow at first, then faster, as if whatever it was had caught my scent. I spun toward the noise, flashlight beams slicing through the dark, but the passage was empty. Still, the dragging continued. From behind me, I whipped around, heart jackhammering in my chest, but saw nothing. Again the sound shifted, now to my left, then behind again. It was toying with me. "Show yourself," I barked, my voice cracking off the narrow walls. Silence. Then, faintly, unbearably faint, a voice slithered from the darkness. "You came too late, Sheriff." It wasn't Powell's voice. This voice was dry, brittle, as if spoken by old parchment rubbed against stone. It carried a weight of ancient hunger, of promises long broken. "You opened the door for us." A rush of footsteps exploded from the side tunnel. I fired instinctively, the shot deafening in the confined space, muzzle flash lighting the cavern for a heartbeat. And in that instant, I saw it. Not a man, not anything that had ever been a man. A figure tall and gaunt, skin stretched tight over a warped frame, bones jutting at impossible angles beneath its pallid flesh. Its eyes were hollow sockets that bled black ichor, and its mouth split unnaturally wide in a grin full of needle teeth. It recoiled from the light, hissing, and darted back into the shadows. Heart pounding, I backed toward the stairs, keeping my flashlight trained on the darkness. I could hear more of them now, dozens, maybe more, skittering and whispering in the tunnels, just out of sight. I turned and ran. As I scrambled up the steps, something slick brushed my ankle. I didn't dare look down. I burst into the church, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me and wedging a pew across it for good measure. Breathing hard, I radioed dispatch. By some miracle, the signal crackled through. "Lorraine," I rasped, "they're under the town. They're in the catacombs." Her voice trembled. "Sheriff, you need to get back here." "Holloway, he's gone." My blood ran ice cold. "Gone?" He just walked out of the clinic, Sheriff, like he didn't have a scratch on him. Doc Hadley tried to stop him, but Holloway wasn't alone." "What do you mean?" Static swallowed her words for a heartbeat. Then, "He had others with him. People we thought were dead." I stared at the trapdoor beneath my feet, feeling the wood thrum with movement below, like something vast and terrible shifting in its sleep. "I'm on my way," I said, but even as I left the church, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Mill Creek was unraveling, and the things beneath our feet had only just begun to rise. Outside, the sky had curdled to a sickly green-gray, clouds boiling over the mountains. The storm had broken, but a heavier, suffocating pressure hung in the air, like the breath before a scream. As I sped back toward town, I saw them in the distance, figures moving along the tree line, pale shapes slipping between the pines. watching, waiting. At the edge of Mill Creek, I slammed on the brakes. Holloway stood in the middle of the road, facing me. Behind him, a procession of townsfolk stretched into the mist. I recognized faces from old obituaries, from gravestones in the churchyard. Dead eyes locked onto mine. Holloway raised a hand, palm outward in silent command. Behind him they began to chant, low at first, almost a hum. But it grew, rising into a droning litany that scraped at my sanity. Words older than the hills themselves, older than men. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I couldn't outrun this. Mill Creek wasn't just haunted, it was owned. And its owners had come home. I killed the headlights, let the cruiser idle beneath me. Sweat beaded at the back of my neck, despite the chill gnawing at my skin. The townsfolk, no, the things in their borrowed skins, didn't advance. They just stood, packed tight across the road, like a wall of flesh and bone, their eyes empty of life, but full of something far worse. Obedience, worship. Holloway, still wearing that same grimy deputy uniform, took a step forward. His smile was all wrong. Too wide, too full of teeth that looked sharper than they ought to be. "Good evening, Sheriff," he rasped, voice hollow like wind through a crypt. "Mill Creek welcomes its prodigal sons." I swallowed thickly. "You're not Holloway." His grin spread impossibly wider. "A shell, a vessel, call it what you like." He opened the way. We walked through. The chanting behind him swelled, dozens of voices grinding against my sanity like rusted blades. I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, like my skull would crack under the pressure of their words. "You don't belong here," I forced out, my hand creeping toward my holstered sidearm. "Not in my town." "Your town," Holloway sneered. "Sheriff, you belong to us, just as your fathers did, just as their fathers before them." My breath caught in my chest. He knew. Deep down, I'd always feared it, hadn't I? My grandfather, old Sheriff Ellsworth, had muttered to himself in the dead of night, warning of the bargain and the deep places. I'd brushed it off as the ramblings of an old man slipping into dementia. But what if it wasn't? What if it was prophecy? "What do you want?" I asked, my voice rough. Holloway tilted his head, as if amused by the question. "The earth opens. The blood remembers. We come to collect." As one, the crowd behind him began to step forward. Panic surged through me. I slammed the cruiser into reverse, tires screeching against the gravel as I backed away from the advancing horde. I didn't stop until I rounded the bend, trees swallowing them from view. Even then, I could still feel them, like their gaze had seeped into my skin. My radio crackled. "Before we move on, please donate me in the form of subscribe." "Sheriff," Lorraine's voice trembled, raw with fear. "They're everywhere." "Barricade the station," I ordered. "Arm anyone who can hold a weapon. I'm coming." I tossed the radio aside and floored the accelerator, my heart thudding like a war drum. All along the road, shadows slipped between the trees, pacing me, following like wolves closing in on wounded prey. Mill Creek was falling apart at the seams. By the time I skidded to a stop in front of the station, the sky had turned an unnatural bruised purple, the clouds churning overhead like something alive. Lorraine was waiting at the door, shotgun in hand, her eyes wide and wild. "They hit the clinic," she gasped. "Took Doc Hadley, cleared out the infirmary. Sheriff, they're taking people." Inside, the remaining townsfolk huddled together, pale and trembling. Old Mayor Tillman clutched a hunting rifle to his chest like a lifeline, sweat dripping from his weathered brow. "They came out of the woods," he croaked. "Took the Wests, the Bakers. Said they were needed for the reckoning." I checked the shells in my shotgun, snapped it closed. "Then we hold the line. We hold it right here." A rumble vibrated through the floorboards beneath our feet, deep and resonant, as if something vast and ancient shifted in the earth below. Lorraine's eyes darted to mine. "Sheriff, the mines." She was right. Whatever had been festering beneath Mill Creek, it was crawling up through the old mine shafts, through the catacombs, through every crack and crevice in our town's foundation. I forced down my rising dread. "We need to shut them in, collapse the tunnels, buy ourselves time." Tillman's voice trembled. "That won't stop them. Nothing will." "Maybe not," I snapped, "but we're not going down without a fight." I handed out what weapons we had left, checked the radio one last time, still mostly static, save for brief snatches of warped voices reciting that same maddening chant. Then, from outside, a sound like splitting timber, a terrible crack that shook the windows. We rushed to the door. At the edge of town, where the ground sloped toward the river, a blackened spire had erupted from the earth, jagged and glistening, veins of obsidian webbed through its surface. Around it, townsfolk old and new gathered, chanting louder now, raising their arms toward the sky. "The moor," Lorraine whispered, her face pale as death. "They're opening the moor." Before I could respond, Holloway stepped forward from the crowd at the spire's base, raising his hands like a preacher before a congregation. "Mill Creek," he bellowed. "Tonight we return to the fold. Tonight we pay the debt long overdue." The spire pulsed, a wet, nauseating throb, and I saw it then, the thing crawling from the earth's wound. Limbs longer than telephone poles, slick and barbed, unfurled like obscene flowers in bloom. A massive gaping mouth split the center of its form, ringed with jagged teeth the size of my cruiser. From that abyssal maw came the sound of millions of whispering voices layered atop one another in a symphony of madness. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. Lorraine fired off a shot in panic, the round sparking harmlessly off the thing's hide. "Fall back," I shouted, dragging her away from the door as the monstrosity began to heave itself fully into our world. But even as I pulled her to safety, I knew the truth. There was no safety left in Mill Creek. We had woken something ancient, something starved. And now it had come to feast. The moor loomed over Mill Creek like a mountain wrenched from hell itself. Tendrils of blackened muscle slid out of its cavernous throat, snatching townsfolk from the ground like dolls. Their screams were swallowed by the chorus of whispers pouring from the thing's gaping maw. I had seen many horrors in this town, missing persons found hollowed out like husks, symbols carved in trees that bled sap the color of old blood, whispers carried on the wind at night. But nothing prepared me for this. Nothing could have prepared me. "Sheriff," Lorraine yanked me back to the moment, her fingers digging into my arm. Her eyes were wild, tears streaking down her face, grime smudged across her forehead like war paint. "We have to run. We can't fight that." She wasn't wrong, but where the hell could we run? Behind us, the station offered no protection. Its wooden walls might as well have been paper against the thing outside. And the roads, they were gone, swallowed by the earth or barricaded by townsfolk twisted into zealots. No, not townsfolk anymore. Vessels. Carriers of the old blood. Holloway's voice cut through the din like a scythe through wheat. "Witness the reckoning," he cried, standing atop a mound of writhing bodies. "The seed sown beneath Mill Creek has sprouted. The pact is fulfilled." A crack rent the air. The sky itself seemed to tear, as if something immense pressed against the veil of reality, eager to join the feast below. I gritted my teeth. Number. My gaze fell on the dynamite crates stacked behind the counter. We kept them for controlled demolitions, old mining regulations, precautions from another era. Funny, or tragic, that they might be the only hope we had left. "We can bury it," I said hoarsely. My throat felt like I'd been swallowing gravel. "We collapse the ground beneath it, send it back where it came from." Lorraine followed my gaze and swallowed hard. "That's suicide." I chambered a shell into my shotgun. "Maybe, but better that than waiting to be swallowed whole." Together we hauled the crates from the storeroom, our hands shaking but determined. Mayor Tillman stumbled over to help, though he looked ready to collapse at any moment. "My family's worked these mines 3 generations, he rasped, coughing hard. "The old shafts run right beneath the square. Enough explosives. Might just work." His eyes locked with mine. "But it has to be placed right at the roots. Under the spire. Under the moor." I nodded grimly. Lorraine grabbed my wrist before I could go. "If you're going down there, I'm coming with you." I wanted to protest, tell her to stay and defend what little hope remained, but the fire in her eyes said she'd follow me whether I agreed or not. "Fine," I said, "we go together." We rigged the dynamite fast, moving on muscle memory alone. All around us the ground trembled and split, seams of black tar bubbling up like veins beneath diseased skin. The townsfolk didn't try to stop us. They were too busy worshipping the thing clawing its way into our world. Maybe they thought we were part of the ceremony, maybe they didn't care. We carried the bundles to the edge of the square, where the earth gaped wide. The air stank of rot and something sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. Flies swarmed our faces, drawn to the pulsing mound of flesh at the center of the pit. "The old shaft is down there," Tillman whispered, clutching his chest. His face had gone grey, sweat pouring from his brow. "Drop it deep. Pray it's enough." I nodded, clenching the wires in my fist. Lorraine squeezed my shoulder. "Let's finish this." We descended into the crater, boots slipping on the slick, pulsating ground. Beneath our feet, the thing's tendrils pushed and coiled, as if aware of our intrusion. Closer, closer. The old mine shaft yawned before us, lined with crumbling timber supports and festooned with symbols carved long ago, runes of binding, of containment. Runes that had weakened over time. "They sealed it once," Lorraine breathed. "They can be sealed again." I set the charges at the mouth of the shaft, wedging them between the timbers. Lorraine laid the last bundle at the base of the spire itself, right where the creature's tendrils had burrowed deepest. "Ready?" I asked, my voice raw. She gave me a tight nod. We climbed back out of the pit, scrambling over bones and broken stone, the detonator clutched in my sweating palm. Holloway's eyes found mine across the square. He tilted his head, as if realizing too late what we intended. "No," he bellowed, lunging forward. His followers surged with him, breaking from their trance. I squeezed the trigger. The explosion ripped through the square like the wrath of God. Fire and rock and screaming bodies were flung skyward as the ground caved in, swallowing the spire, the moor, and the zealots in a roaring, deafening collapse. Lorraine and I were thrown back by the shockwave, landing hard against the steps of the station. Dust and debris rained down like ash from a volcanic storm. Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. I coughed, my ears ringing. Lorraine groaned beside me, but she was alive, bruised, bleeding, but alive. We staggered to our feet and looked out over what remained of Mill Creek. The moor was gone. The spire had crumbled into black rubble, its tendrils severed and twitching like dying snakes. The townsfolk, those who hadn't been caught in the blast, lay motionless, their eyes vacant, their bodies slack. For a moment, hope sparked in my chest. Maybe we'd done it. Then the ground beneath my boots trembled again, faint but there, persistent. Lorraine's voice was hoarse when she spoke. "Sheriff, it's still moving." And in the distance, far beneath the earth, I heard it. The whisper of countless voices rising once more. The moor wasn't dead, we had only wounded it. And deep below Mill Creek, it was waking up angry. The dust hadn't even settled when the ground quaked again. I braced against the station's battered frame as loose rubble slid past my boots. Lorraine clutched her side, blood seeping through her torn jacket, her eyes wide and wild in the aftermath. "It's not over," she rasped. No, it wasn't. The creature's heartbeat still pulsed through the earth. I could feel it in my teeth, a throbbing vibration rising from the depths. The dynamite had slowed it down, sure, but all we'd really done was piss it off. I scanned the ruins of Mill Creek. Fires smoldered among the wreckage, cracks veined the streets, black tar bubbling up in sluggish, stinking flows. Holloway and his zealots were gone, consumed by the collapse or torn apart in the blast. But we'd lost more than fanatics. Our people, our neighbors, lay scattered like broken dolls, their faces frozen in expressions of terror or blissful surrender. "This is my fault," I muttered, tasting ash on my tongue. Lorraine shook her head weakly. "Number this town was doomed long before you put on the badge." Maybe she was right. But I couldn't let it end like this. "We need to get below," I said. "The tunnels go deeper than the mine shafts we blew. That thing's rooted down in the ancient bedrock. We cut it out at the source." Lorraine grimaced, but there was determination in her eyes. "Then let's finish what we started." We scavenged supplies from the wreckage, flashlights, rope, another box of dynamite I found half buried in rubble. My radio was dead, and the lines out of town were cut. But at this point, we weren't calling for help. No cavalry was coming. The only way out was through. The entrance to the lower tunnels lay beyond the cemetery, hidden behind the caretaker's shed. I'd found it years ago during a storm when the hillside eroded and revealed a narrow crevice. Back then, it was just a curiosity, a cool breath of air rising from the earth. Now it felt like the mouth of hell. Lorraine and I squeezed into the opening, our flashlights piercing the oppressive dark. The walls were damp and slick, carved by old hands long before modern tools shaped the upper mines. Symbols marked the stone, some I recognized from the grimoires in Holloway's house, others older still. This wasn't built by miners, Lorraine whispered. No, I agreed, this is older than Mill Creek. The tunnels twisted and sloped downward, deeper and deeper, until we lost all sense of time. The air grew colder, fouler. A sound like breathing, slow, heavy, labored, reverberated through the stone. At a fork in the path, we found bones. Piles of them. Human mostly, but not entirely. Some of the skulls were elongated, ridged with patterns too symmetrical to be natural. Sacrifices, I realized, a burial ground for offerings made to whatever dwelled below. Lorraine's beam flicked across a message etched into the wall above the bone piles. She read aloud, her voice trembling. When the earth grows hungry, feed it flesh. When the moor stirs, silence it with blood. When the spire cracks, flee, for death follows. We had done none of these things in time. The tunnel to the left descended into a cavern where the air pulsed with heat. Wisps of sulfur coiled through the gloom. Lorraine covered her mouth with her sleeve, but it did little good. That's when we saw it. The roots of the moor. They weren't roots in the way a tree has roots. These were tendrils of black muscle, threaded with veins of glowing crimson ichor, burrowing deep into the earth like parasitic worms. They pulsed rhythmically as though pumping life, or death, from something deeper still. Lorraine raised her flashlight, and the beam revealed a grisly scene. Townsfolk, or what remained of them, embedded in the fleshy walls of the cavern. Their mouths hung open in eternal screams, eyes clouded, limbs fused with the living structure. "They're part of it now," she whispered, horrified. "No," I said, tightening my grip on the detonator wire, "not for long." We planted the final charges at the base of the tendrils, wedging dynamite into the crevices where the unnatural flesh met stone. My hands shook, but I forced myself to focus. Just as I connected the last wire, the ground beneath us heaved. The moor felt us. A tendril as thick as an oak tore from the wall, slashing through the cavern. It narrowly missed Lorraine, smashing into the stone with bone-crushing force. Another followed, writhing toward me like a blind serpent seeking prey. We ran. The tunnel behind us collapsed as the moor thrashed in fury, sending rockfalls cascading like rain. We barely made it to a narrow ledge above the main cavern before the passage sealed shut behind us. Breathing hard, I looked at Lorraine. She was pale, streaked with dust and sweat, but alive. "Blow it," she gasped. "No time," I said, pointing ahead. "We get out first." We scrambled along the ledge, stones crumbling beneath our boots. Below, the moor's tendrils lashed and coiled, shaking the cavern. I clutched the detonator to my chest like a holy relic. At the end of the ledge, we found a shaft leading straight up. Old iron rungs were bolted into the wall, rusted but intact. Lorraine didn't hesitate. She started climbing. I followed, each movement sending flakes of rust raining down. Below us, the moor bellowed, a thunderous sound that rattled my ribs. We reached the surface just as the earth behind us caved in. Without waiting, I triggered the detonator. The explosion roared through the mountain, sending a geyser of fire and stone shooting skyward. The ground split wide, belching smoke and burning debris. Trees toppled like matchsticks, and a blast of searing heat scorched our faces. When the smoke cleared, the cavern and the moor were gone. All that remained was a smouldering crater. We stood at the edge, breathing hard, watching as the last flickers of fire died beneath the ash. Lorraine broke the silence first. "Did we get it?" Before I could answer, the earth gave a final ominous shudder, and from the depths of the crater, a low guttural laugh, not human, not beast, rolled up to meet us. The sound of that laugh, if it could be called that, gnawed at the edges of my sanity. It wasn't a laugh meant for human ears. It was the sound of something old, something patient, something amused by our efforts to destroy it. Lorraine gripped my arm. Tell me you heard that. I wish I hadn't. We stumbled back from the crater's rim, both of us raw with exhaustion and choked with soot. The trees around us were blackened silhouettes, their bark blistered from the blast. Smoke coiled through the skeletal remains of the forest, and somewhere in the distance the old church bell clanged once, twice, though no one was left alive to ring it. That wasn't the moor, Lorraine rasped. No, I agreed, that was something deeper. We thought we'd been battling the monster beneath Mill Creek, but we were wrong. The moor was only a gate, a mouth, and like any mouth, it led somewhere darker. And we'd just rung its dinner bell. Hours passed, though time had lost all meaning. The sun never broke through the pall of smoke. Lorraine and I retreated to what remained of the sheriff's station to regroup, patch our wounds, and figure out what came next. The radio crackled uselessly. Phones were dead. Power lines lay like gutted veins across the road. We were cut off in every way that mattered. I found an old topographic map in the drawer and spread it across the scorched desk. Lorraine lit the last surviving lantern and leaned over it. There, she said, pointing to a jagged seam of fault lines that ran beneath Mill Creek and deeper into the mountains. That's where the tunnels led. I traced the lines with my finger. They converged at a place marked Black Hollow Cavern. No one had set foot there in decades, not since the mining company sealed it off after a string of unexplained accidents. If we're going to end this, I said, we finish it there. Lorraine's eyes were hard as flint. Then let's go. The path to Black Hollow was a charred wasteland. Ash swirled in the air like snow, clinging to our skin and clothes until we looked like phantoms ourselves. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Shadows flitted at the edge of my vision, too fast to catch, too solid to be tricks of the smoke. Do you see them? Lorraine asked hoarsely. Yeah. Shapes in the fog, twisted parodies of the townsfolk we'd failed to save. Their faces stretched unnaturally, eyes like dark coals burning in the sockets. They didn't attack. They only followed, silently, as if drawn to us by some invisible tether. They're part of it now, Lorraine murmured, echoes of the moor. Or bait, I thought grimly, meant to drive us mad before we reached the end. But we kept moving. The entrance to Black Hollow Cavern yawned open at the base of a jagged cliff, its moor blacker than the smoke-choked sky. The air here tasted metallic, like rust and blood, and each breath felt like inhaling a scream. Lorraine coughed violently, doubling over. Her eyes were rimmed with red, veins darkening beneath her skin. It's in the air, she gasped. Hold on, I said, pulling a rag from my kit and soaking it with water before tying it over her mouth and nose. I did the same for myself. It helped. Barely. We descended into the cavern. Inside, the walls pulsed with a sickly bioluminescence. Veins of molten crimson snaked through the rock, casting a hellish glow that banished the need for flashlights. The heat was suffocating, rising in waves from below, as though we were walking directly into the belly of the earth. We heard it before we saw it. A thundering heartbeat. Slow, impossibly deep, it vibrated through the soles of our boots and rattled our bones. And then the whispers started. They came from all directions, a chorus of voices, some familiar, others not. They spoke in fragments, memories twisted by the moor. Sheriff, why did you leave us? Lorraine, you promised me you'd come home. I recognized them, the voices of my father, my mother, my fallen deputies. Even Holloway's zealous chant wormed its way into the noise. Lorraine pressed her hands to her ears. It's not real. It's not real. But I wasn't so sure. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, so immense that the ceiling was lost in darkness. In the center of the chamber pulsed the true horror. Not the moor. No, this was what fed the moor. A heart. Bigger than a house, suspended in the air by strands of black sinew that connected it to the cavern walls. It beat sluggishly, each thump sending ripples of molten stone across the floor. And around the heart, kneeling in reverence, were dozens of figures. Miners in tattered uniforms, their faces long since decayed, but their bodies still moving in grotesque parody of life. Holloway's congregation, their eyes vacant, mouths open in soundless prayer. They had all become part of it. Lorraine swallowed hard. What? What is this thing? I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. It's the seed of something worse. I remembered the old words carved into the tunnels. When the spire cracks, flee. The spire was the moor. We had cracked it open, and now the seed was waking. We didn't hesitate. I unspooled the wire from my pack and began setting the remaining charges around the cavern's perimeter. Lorraine worked alongside me, sweat streaming down her face, her hands shaking but determined. As we worked, the figures around the heart turned to face us in unison. They rose, silent, methodical. They shambled toward us, dragging rusted tools and shards of bone. Faster, Lorraine urged. We placed the last charge as the first of the hollow-eyed miners reached us. I swung my rifle, the butt connecting with a wet crack, sending the thing sprawling. But more followed. We ran. The detonator shook in my hand as we scrambled back through the tunnel, pursued by the nightmare chorus of the dead. I risked a glance behind me. The heart had begun to glow, bright as a dying sun, its beat quickening. I squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening. Flames engulfed the chamber, consuming the heart and the thralls alike. The shockwave hurled us to the cavern floor, debris raining down in burning fragments. And then, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. We lay there, dazed, staring at the collapsed tunnel. For a terrible moment, I thought we'd entombed ourselves alongside the horror. But then Lorraine stirred, coughing weakly. Did we do it? Before I could answer, the ground beneath us shuddered one final time, and from the wreckage, a single pulse, one last heartbeat, echoed into the abyss. When I came to, the world smelled of burnt rock and blood. My head throbbed. My vision swam with double images of fractured stone and curling smoke. Lorraine's coughing pulled me back from the edge of unconsciousness. Still alive, she rasped, her voice barely more than a croak. I pushed myself up on trembling arms. The tunnel behind us had collapsed completely, sealing away the smoldering ruin of the heart. But despite the fire, despite the destruction, I could still feel it. A pulse, slow, relentless. No, I realized grimly, we hadn't killed it. We'd only slowed it down. The moor, or whatever lay deeper than that, was still alive. Lorraine seemed to reach the same conclusion at the same time. She shook her head, her soot-streaked face tight with despair. We didn't stop it. We woke it. As if in answer, the ground trembled beneath our feet. Fissures split open in the tunnel walls, oozing molten rock that hissed and spat like living things. I grabbed Lorraine by the arm. We need to move. Now. We stumbled through the tunnel, coughing and bleeding, driven by sheer willpower and the primal instinct to survive. Every step away from that monstrous chamber felt like an act of defiance against the inevitable. But Mill Creek wasn't going to let us go so easily. When we emerged from the cavern's mouth, the landscape had changed. Gone were the familiar trails and the blackened remains of trees. In their place sprawled a wasteland of ash and glassy rock, as if the earth itself had melted and frozen mid-collapse. The sky was a churning cauldron of storm clouds, blood-red lightning forking through the gloom. And there, at the center of it all, was Mill Creek, or what was left of it. The town was in ruins. Buildings had collapsed into smoking heaps. The streets were choked with debris. But what truly chilled my blood was the silence. No birds, no wind. No human cries for help, only the sound of our ragged breaths and the distant, ceaseless thrum of that unholy heartbeat. Lorraine clutched my arm. Look. I followed her gaze to the center of town. The church, the oldest building in Mill Creek, older even than the mines, stood miraculously intact amid the devastation. But it had changed. Veins of black rock spiraled up its steeple like creeping ivy. The cross at its peak had twisted into a jagged, unnatural shape, resembling the moor itself. The source, I whispered. It was never just the mines. Lorraine's eyes were wide with understanding. The church was the first gate. The realization struck like a hammer blow. Mill Creek hadn't been built around the mine. It had been built because of the mine, because of the thing beneath it. The founders, the old families, had known. They had always known, and they'd made their home atop the jaws of a slumbering god. As we approached the church, the air grew heavy, pressing down on us like an invisible weight. My vision blurred at the edges, my ears filled with a low, droning chant, not in any language I recognized, but somehow I understood it. It was a summons, a call to return to the fold. Inside the church, candlelight flickered despite the ruin. The pews were filled with unmoving figures, heads bowed in silent reverence. I stepped closer, and my stomach turned to ice. They weren't alive. The townsfolk, those who hadn't been consumed by the mines or the fire, were here, frozen like wax effigies. Eyes sealed shut, mouths slackly open in mock prayer. At the altar stood a figure in black robes, his face hidden beneath a cowl stitched from scorched leather. "Holloway," Lorraine breathed. But when the figure raised its head, it wasn't the sheriff. It was something older, something that had worn many faces over many lifetimes. "Welcome home," it intoned, its voice like grinding stone. "You've come at last to bear witness." "To what?" I demanded, though my throat was dry and my hands trembled. "The awakening," the figure said simply. "The seed has broken its shell. The harvest is near." Lorraine raised her weapon. "Not if we end this now." The figure smiled, and behind it the walls of the church split open like a rotting fruit. What lay beyond was not the town, not the mountains. It was an abyss, a churning vortex of fire and shadow filled with writhing tendrils and blinking lidless eyes. The heartbeat thundered louder than ever, shaking the earth beneath our feet. "You cannot end what has always been," the figure said, spreading its arms. "This place is but a doorway, and the door is open." A tidal wave of darkness poured into the church, sweeping over the frozen townsfolk, consuming them utterly. Lorraine fired, the blast of her shotgun swallowed by the roar of the abyss. I grabbed her, pulling her back toward the threshold. "We can't stop it," I shouted. "We have to run." But there was nowhere left to run. The ground beneath the church split apart, and we fell. We tumbled through the chasm, past layers of stone and bone and ancient petrified roots, until we crashed onto a platform of obsidian rock suspended over the abyss. Above us, the figure in black descended slowly, borne aloft by unseen forces. "Do you see now?" it asked. "You were never meant to fight it. You were meant to feed it." Lorraine struggled to her feet, defiant to the last. "Then it'll starve on me." She hurled her last explosive charge at the figure. It struck true, detonating in a blaze of fire and light. The figure screamed, a sound that tore through my mind like jagged glass. But it wasn't destroyed. It only shed its skin, revealing the thing beneath. A twisted mockery of human form, composed of bone and sinew, crowned with antlers of obsidian. The creature lashed out, and Lorraine was thrown across the platform. "No!" I screamed, rushing to her side. She was breathing, barely, her eyes fluttering open as I cradled her. "End it," she whispered. I didn't know how, but something stirred within me then. A memory buried beneath layers of fear and doubt. The old words carved into the tunnel walls. When the spire cracks, flee. When the seed breaks, burn the root. The church, the mine, the caverns, they were all branches of the same root. And there was still one place left to go, the heart of the mountain itself. If we could burn it, truly burn it, maybe, just maybe, we could sever the connection. I lifted Lorraine in my arms and turned toward the abyss. "I have to finish this," I told her. She managed a faint nod. "Go." As the creature lunged, I ran for the edge of the platform and leapt into the chasm, into the fire, into the root of it all. I plunged into the abyss, clutching Lorraine's battered body tight against me. We fell through burning shadows, past jagged outcrops that pulsed like diseased organs. Heat scalded my skin. I smelled burning flesh, not just from around me, but from me. But I didn't let go. The air here wasn't air at all. It was thick and syrupy, like breathing in blood. Every inhalation felt like swallowing fire, but I forced my lungs to work, forced my eyes to stay open as the darkness swallowed us whole. Then, just when I thought I would be devoured by the fall, we landed, not on stone, not on fire, but on something alive. The surface writhed beneath my boots, as though standing on the flank of some titanic beast. Veins the size of train tracks glowed red beneath translucent, leathery skin, and each pulse sent a nauseating ripple through the ground. I laid Lorraine down gently, checking her pulse. faint but still there. "Hang on," I croaked. "Just a little longer." My eyes adjusted to the suffocating gloom. We were in an immense chamber, so vast it felt like the hollowed-out core of the earth itself. Above, far beyond reach, the ceiling throbbed and quivered like a living sky. And at the center, rooted like a cancerous tree, stood the heart. It pulsed in time with the heartbeat that had haunted Mill Creek for centuries. Vast black tendrils spread from its base, burrowing deep into the flesh beneath. I could see shapes moving inside the heart, shadows of things too massive to be human, suspended in embryonic sacs. The moor had only been a gate. This was the root of the infection, the source of Mill Creek's nightmares. The voices began again, louder than ever. "Burn the root. Feed the fire. End the seed. End the harvest." I stumbled toward the heart, my limbs heavy as lead. With every step, the voices grew clearer, more insistent. They weren't just guiding me, they were pleading. Because even this thing, this ancient abomination, feared what was coming next. I remembered the dynamite. Lorraine had managed to save 2 sticks, tucked inside her pack. Shaking, I fumbled them free, cradling them like sacred relics. The detonator still worked, a miracle in itself. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Not alone. Lorraine stirred behind me, coughing weakly. "Sheriff," she rasped. I knelt beside her, brushing a blood-crusted lock of hair from her face. "You stay here," I told her, "no matter what happens." Her eyes, dulled but defiant, met mine. She tried to speak, but I pressed a finger to her lips. "I've got to finish it." And then I turned, walking alone toward the heart. The closer I got, the more I saw. Faces, thousands of them, trapped beneath the membrane of the heart, mouths frozen in eternal screams. Some were old, miners from the collapse, townsfolk long dead. But others were recent. The missing hunters, the Simmons family, even children. All of them fed to this thing. All of them part of it now. I planted the dynamite at the base of the heart, wedging the sticks between the thrumming roots. The vibrations rattled my teeth. My skin blistered from the searing heat, but I forced myself to work. As I set the detonator, I heard a rasping voice behind me. "You cannot kill what was never alive." I spun, raising my weapon instinctively. The creature from the church loomed at the chamber's edge, its obsidian antlers scraping the ceiling. Eyes like molten coals burned in its skeletal face. It moved with terrible grace, each step causing the living ground to shudder. "It was always you," the creature said, its voice like a landslide, "chosen by the blood of this land, bound by duty, by heritage. You were never meant to destroy, you were meant to inherit." It extended a clawed hand toward me. "Embrace your legacy, become the warden of the root, spare your town, spare yourself." For a heartbeat, I hesitated. I saw it, saw what it offered. Power beyond reckoning, a seat at the table of ancient gods. I could rule Mill Creek, command its dark forces, protect my people in a way no mortal sheriff ever could. But then I looked at Lorraine, her chest rising and falling weakly. I looked at the faces trapped inside the heart, and I remembered every life this thing had stolen. "No," I said, voice steady, "no more." I squeezed the detonator. The creature roared, lunging toward me, but too late. The dynamite exploded in a blinding flash of fire and fury. The chamber convulsed, the heart rupturing like a swollen blister. Black ichor sprayed in all directions, sizzling as it hit the molten ground. The tendrils writhed and thrashed, severed from their source, but the fire alone wasn't enough. The voices screamed in my mind. "Feed the fire. Fuel the ending." I understood. It needed more. Without hesitation, I hurled myself into the gaping wound of the heart. Pain beyond any mortal understanding consumed me. My body dissolved in flame, my mind shredded into ribbons. But even as I burned, I pushed my rage, my defiance, my very soul into the flames. The heart caught. The flames turned from orange to white-hot brilliance, spreading through the chamber like a living inferno. The walls of the cavern cracked and crumbled, the ancient veins of power running through the mountain withered and collapsed. The creature screamed in agony, its form disintegrating under the searing heat. Before we move on, please donate me in the form of subscribe. Lorraine, shielded behind a slab of fallen stone, watched as the fire consumed the root, watched as the mountain itself began to implode, watched as I vanished into the light. When the mountain died, it died screaming. A final deafening blast split the earth, sending a pillar of fire into the sky. The shockwave flattened what remained of Mill Creek, snuffing out every last trace of its cursed legacy. And then silence. For the first time in centuries, true silence. Lorraine crawled from the wreckage, coughing, her face streaked with ash and tears. She looked to where the mountain had stood, now reduced to a smoking crater. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice raw with grief, "but I wasn't gone, not entirely." As the wind carried away the last of the smoke, a single flickering ember drifted down from the sky. It landed in Lorraine's outstretched palm, and in that ember a heartbeat pulsed, steady, strong. I had done it, but at a cost no one could ever repay. The wind carried the scent of burning, not the familiar earthy smell of the mountain fires I'd known all my life. This was something darker, something deeper. The smoke had a taste to it, sharp and bitter on my tongue, like ash from an old funeral pyre. Lorraine held the ember in her hand, and I could feel it too. The heartbeat, thumping, steady, alive, alive. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stop the inevitable, but I knew it had already begun. The thing I'd fought, the entity that had ruled Mill Creek for so long, hadn't been eradicated. It hadn't been killed. It had simply been changed. The world around me, the world that had been so quiet in the aftermath of the fire, began to stir again. The air was thick with the remnants of something alive, something vast and waiting. "Is it over?" Lorraine asked, her voice a ghost of its former strength. I looked at her, seeing the cracks that had appeared since the collapse. Her eyes, once sharp and full of determination, now seemed hollow. It was like looking at a person caught between two worlds, the living and the dead. "I don't know," I said. "But whatever we didn't stop it completely." Her lips trembled. "But we destroyed the heart, the root. We burned it." I nodded slowly. "We burned it. But it's never just about the heart, it's about what it is. What the mountain has always been." She looked down at the ember in her palm, the flickering light reflecting in her eyes. "We can't let it keep growing. We have to finish it." I took a deep breath, but the weight of the world pressed down harder than ever. "I tried, but it won't be finished until it's gone. All of it." Lorraine stood up, her breath shallow but her hands steady. "Then we go back in." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed that we couldn't return to that place, that we couldn't fight whatever had become of the mountain. But my hands shook with the knowledge that there was no other choice. The ember in her palm throbbed with power, but it wasn't enough. It couldn't be. And deep down, I knew there was only one way to end it. We trekked through the ruins of Mill Creek, through the wreckage of the town that had once been my home. The buildings were gone, flattened into dust. The roads were torn open, the earth cracked wide like a wound that refused to heal. There was no sound here but the wind and the faint hum of the heartbeat that pulsed beneath the ground. As we moved, I could feel it. The mountain was awake. The earth beneath us shifted like a living thing, twitching, shifting, groaning as though it were stretching out its limbs after centuries of slumber. The roots of the mountain stretched deep into the heart of the world, into the bones of the earth itself. And then we saw it. The hole. It had opened at the foot of the old church, the place where the Moor had first cracked the earth. The ground was charred and scorched, but from the depths of the hole, something dark and ancient rose. A dark spire, twisted like the remains of a long-dead tree, stood tall above us. It pulsed with the same sickly rhythm we had felt in the heart, the same rhythm that had stolen the town, the same rhythm that was beginning to rise. I looked at Lorraine. She was staring at the spire, her face pale, her hands shaking. "It's coming back," she said. "We're not going to let it," I replied, though even I wasn't sure I believed that. I wasn't sure if we could stop it now. If anything, I wasn't even sure it was ever meant to be stopped. We descended into the hole, down into the heart of the earth once more. This time the air was colder, sharper, as though the mountain was breathing in the very breath of death itself. The walls were slick with something that felt like oil, slick and warm beneath my fingertips. At the bottom of the hole, the spire was not just a thing of stone. It was alive. A vast, twisting root of obsidian and bone, its tendrils snaking through the rock, cracking open the earth like a can being torn apart. It was a thing of pure, pulsing darkness, and it seemed to grow with every second that passed. At its base, an altar stood, a stone slab covered in ancient runes and symbols, some of which I could recognize. The same symbols carved into the walls of the tunnels, the same symbols that had sealed the town's fate long ago. Lorraine took a step forward, her eyes locked on the altar. "They used it," she whispered. "They used this to bind it." I could feel it now, the weight of 1,000 years, of blood and sacrifice, of ancient promises made in the dark. The altar had been used to summon this thing, to bind it to the land, to make Mill Creek its vessel. I understood now. The town had never been a town at all. It had been a trap for the thing that slumbered beneath the earth, a trap that the people had built. And I had been a part of that trap all my life. "We have to destroy it," I said, my voice cracking. "We have to burn it." But Lorraine wasn't listening. She was already moving toward the altar, already reaching for the symbols etched in the stone. "What are you doing?" I shouted. Her fingers brushed the runes, and for a moment her body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back in her head. The ember she had been holding flared with a sudden blinding light, and then the mountain responded. The spire shook violently, the roots pulling from the rock like snakes tearing through flesh. The altar cracked and split open, and the sound that followed was like the earth itself screaming. It was too late to stop it. The heartbeat quickened. The last thing I saw before the world went black was Lorraine standing in front of the altar, her hand extended, her eyes wild with a kind of reckless resolve. "End it," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos. And then the darkness took me. I woke to the sound of crackling fire. For a moment I thought I was back at the edge of the mountain, staring into the ruins of Mill Creek. But then the air hit me, thick, almost suffocating. The ground beneath me wasn't solid. It was soft, wet. And everything was silent. No wind, no pulse of the heartbeat. Just the low hiss of burning. I sat up, my head swimming, my vision blurry. For a moment I thought I'd lost my mind, but then I saw Lorraine. She was kneeling a few feet away from me, her body hunched forward. Her face was covered in grime, her hair matted to her forehead. But it was her eyes. Her eyes were the worst, empty, hollow, as though something had drained the life out of her. I pushed myself up, my legs unsteady as I made my way toward her. "Lorraine," I whispered. She didn't respond. Her hand rested on the ground in front of her, fingers splayed, as if she were holding something, or waiting for something. I looked down. At first I couldn't see it. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw the glimmer of a twisted root pushing up from the earth. The spire. It was still here, pulsing with sickly energy, wrapped around Lorraine's wrist like a serpent. The thing had burrowed deep into her, its tendrils growing into her skin, twisting her arm in unnatural ways. I could feel the pull of it, that same heavy, suffocating weight that had threatened to crush me in the moor. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I took a step back, panic clawing at my chest. "Lorraine," I shouted, shaking her by the shoulder, "you've got to wake up." Her eyes flickered, but she didn't seem to hear me. Her lips parted, and the words that came out were not her own. They were deep, guttural, like a voice from the pit of the earth. "They have come," Lorraine said, her voice distorted, unrecognizable. "The harvest is upon us." I grabbed her by the shoulders, desperately trying to break the hold the spire had on her. "Number no, we're not going to let this happen. Not now." But the ground beneath us trembled. The spire's roots writhed like something alive. The sound was deafening, the echoes reverberating through the chamber, through the mountain itself. I could feel it in my bones. The mountain was waking again. I had failed. The creature was not gone. It had never been gone. It had just been waiting. I pulled Lorraine to her feet, staggering under her weight, and dragged her away from the altar. The fire crackled louder now, the flames licking the edges of the stone. But they couldn't burn the thing. They couldn't touch it. The heartbeat rose again, pulsing, faster and faster. I thought I could hear it in my chest, too. The rhythm, the call. Lorraine's hand was still locked in place, her fingers twitching as the root twisted into her skin. It was like something was feeding on her, like she was being taken. I pulled harder, screaming her name, but it was no use. Then I felt it. A sudden shift in the air, a presence, cold and overwhelming. I turned toward the source of the sensation, and what I saw froze me in place. From the darkness, the creature emerged. It was not the same as before, no longer confined to the skeletal form I'd seen earlier. No longer the shadowy, antlered thing from the moor. It had taken on something more real. It towered over us, its body shifting and twisting, like it was made from the very darkness that had once plagued the town. It was humanoid in shape, but its form was wrong. Its limbs were too long, its skin too thin, like parchment stretched over bone. Its eyes, those molten coals, burned with an intensity that scorched the air between us. And its voice. "You thought you could end it, but you don't understand," it rasped. "You can't stop what is already inside of you." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. "What? What are you?" The creature's mouth split open in a grotesque grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth, like blackened knives. "I am the hunger that has always been. The darkness that has always lived in your blood, your bones. Mill Creek was never your town. It was always mine." The earth rumbled beneath us. Lorraine screamed, the sound sharp and piercing, as if the very essence of her being was being torn apart. But the creature didn't seem to care. It was looking at me, not at her. "You don't see it, do you?" it crooned, its voice low and mocking. "You are one of us. You always have been." I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. I had fought this thing. I had burned it, broken it apart. But it wasn't gone. "No," the creature said, as though reading my thoughts. "You didn't burn it. You didn't kill it. You only woke it. And now, you are mine." A cold, crushing weight settled over me. It was true, I had always been part of this. I had always been marked. My family, my bloodline, had been tied to the darkness from the moment the first bargain had been struck. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. This was my fate, and there was nothing I could do to escape it. Lorraine's body jerked in my arms, her face twisted in agony as the spire's roots seemed to merge with her, pulling her into the ground. The air hummed with a deep, terrible power. The heartbeat was everywhere now, pulsing in the earth, in my chest, in my mind. And the creature was laughing. "Welcome to the end," it said. But as I looked at Lorraine, as I looked at the creature, something inside me snapped. I didn't have to be a part of this. I didn't have to let this happen. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. And then, with everything I had left, I turned to face the creature one last time. And I fought back. The creature's laugh echoed in the depths of the earth, a sound like cracked bones and whispers in a forgotten tongue. It twisted in the air, so thick it seemed to press against my lungs, stealing my breath. Lorraine's body jerked again, her skin beginning to twist under the influence of the roots pulling at her. The spire seemed to vibrate with an unnatural hum, and I could feel its tendrils reaching out, threatening to consume everything. But something inside me had shifted. I could feel it, the old familiar power of Mill Creek, the buried horror that ran through my veins. It had always been here, lurking just beneath the surface of my skin, waiting for the moment it could be called upon, the moment it could take me. But I wasn't going to let it. Not now. I took a step toward the creature, my feet heavy in the dirt, my mind still reeling from everything I had just realized. There was no going back, no undoing the damage I had done. But I had one chance to stop it all. Lorraine's eyes flickered again, her fingers twitching as though she were trying to fight against the roots that had claimed her. The spire's pulse quickened, and I felt a horrible ache in my chest, like my heart was being torn out. "Stop this," I whispered to her. My voice was hoarse, broken. "Please, don't let it win." Her head turned toward me, her face still twisted in agony, but there was a spark in her eyes, a glimmer of recognition. She knew what I was trying to do. She knew what was at stake. I turned back to the creature, gripping the hilt of my gun. But this time, the gun was useless. The creature was beyond bullets, beyond anything I had ever been taught to fight. "You can't win," it taunted, its voice dripping with malice. "You never had a chance. You think you're different from the rest of them, but you're not. You're just like them. Just like me. I shook my head. Number, I'm not. The creature's eyes narrowed, its grin stretching wide. Then prove it. I reached into my pocket, feeling the weight of the old coin there. The one I'd found all those weeks ago when I'd first started uncovering the truth about Mill Creek. The one that had belonged to the man who had died in the fire. The one that had marked me. I held it up, my hand trembling, and in the dim, flickering light, the coin seemed to gleam with a power of its own. The creature's expression shifted, its grin faltering for the briefest of moments. "You don't understand what you're doing," it growled. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The coin was the key. It had always been the key. A symbol of the ancient deal made between Mill Creek and whatever entity lurked beneath the mountain. A bargain that had bound the town to the creature, a bargain that had claimed the lives of so many and now threatened to consume everything in its path. But the coin wasn't just a token, it was a break, a crack in the pact, a way to end it. I hurled the coin into the air, and for a moment everything seemed to freeze. The world, the creature, even the heartbeat that had been pulsing so loudly in my ears, all of it stopped. Then, with a deafening roar, the earth shook beneath me. The creature screamed, a sound so shrill and terrible it rattled my teeth. But I didn't flinch. I was watching the coin, watching it as it floated through the air like it was weightless, like it was glowing with a power I couldn't quite comprehend. And then it landed. The moment it hit the ground, the spire shuddered. The roots that had claimed Lorraine's body twisted and cracked like dry branches, and with a sickening sound, they ripped free of her skin. Lorraine collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, her body trembling as the last remnants of the creature's influence faded from her. The creature turned toward her, its eyes burning with fury. But it was too late. The earth split open around us, a massive rift that ran all the way through the mountain. And from that rift, a wave of light poured out, blinding and pure, sweeping everything in its path. The creature recoiled, its form disintegrating into nothingness, its scream echoing into the chasm that had opened beneath us. The heartbeat was gone. The mountain trembled one last time, and the ground cracked and split wide open. The fire, the ruins, the roots, all of it was consumed by the light. And in that moment I understood. The creature had been part of the mountain, it had been part of Mill Creek. But it was no longer. The coin had broken the pact, shattered the hold it had on the town and the land. It was over. The mountain was silent now. The air was still. I turned back to Lorraine, who was slowly pushing herself up from the ground, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We did it," she whispered, barely able to speak. I nodded, my chest tight, my heart still racing. "Yeah, we did." But even as the light began to fade, I could still feel something deep in the earth. A subtle tremor beneath the ground, a pulse, a warning. Mill Creek was free, but the mountain had not forgotten. It would never forget. The cost of the bargain had been paid, and for a while there would be peace. But I knew deep down that the mountain would never truly let go. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but eventually the land began to settle. The smoke cleared, and what remained of the town, the ghosts, the memories, began to fade. As we walked away, Lorraine and I, the weight of the past lifted from our shoulders. The creature was gone, the town was free, but Mill Creek's story would live on. And so would mine.